Alright, let's make a goddamn compound bow. First, 2 lawnmower blades were cut to size. Then I drew myself a pretty picture and cut out the riser from a mill saw. Up next was drilling holes and adding end brackets. Also designing the arrow rest, cams and sight. The sight was made from alley tube and was tricky to drill. The plates that hold the arms in place are made from black steel, and the arrow rest design is inspired from folding knives. The point is, the rest springs back. The sight uses fishing line for contrast and a metal weight to make sure the hand is steady when firing. These cams are made of mild steel, so they were easy enough to cut, grind, drill, saw, file, and sand. Next I made some modifications to my belt grinder so I could make my cams nice and shiny for the first dry fit. Next came the additional cam parts and carving the grooves for the strings. I also cut slots into the riser, found some brackets, and then realised I screwed up the arms. Replacing them was short work, and these new arms were much better suited, and much wider. Up next was me waving at a picture whilst ranting. I think I was trying to explain that these plates sandwiched the arms. Anyway, these odd-shaped parts, along with these other odd-shaped parts, will serve as the arm hinge. This required a lot of precise drilling, but I did it off camera to keep this video short. These arm hinges allow for axle-to-axle length adjustment. This also means no bow press is needed when stringing. Another benefit is being able to line up the arms, but enough arm torque. Next, an extra axis was added to the sight so that it could be tuned, and then everything was laid out on my table so I could reassess where I was at. Off camera, I cut slots into the arms to allow for cam clearance, and countersunk the cam holes. To drill the holes for the bearings, I used a tin step bit bought from Bunnings. I then spent time perfecting the axles. These rectangles hold the cam in place. After this, I added some extra functionality to the sight for finer tuning, though I'm still not quite happy with it. And in other news, the arms were ready to be fully assembled. But before we got into that, I had to make the grip out of some wood I had laying around. I think it looks pretty cool in the end. The live edges gave it added grippiness. Whilst working on the handle, I also assembled the arms properly. At this point, we were so close to firing the first arrow. The next parts I introduced to hold the strings. Learning to make compound bowstrings was a bit of a struggle. If you want to learn how, I recommend you check out this guy on YouTube. In my opinion, he covered it best, but I'm not at a point where I can teach anyone. We finally entered a stage where we have an assembled bow. I had to string it off camera because I had no idea what I was doing. Up next, I made an alley firing stand to hold the bow. Luckily, I could just use bolts that connect through a stand to the stabilizer. To make sure it was mounted at 90 degrees, I attached a spirit level, which I think was a handy feature. Another additional part that I added was this arm to hold the strings aside so they don't interfere with the arrow. I also thought it a good idea to build a trigger release. So I tied on an additional string and gave it a whirl. Result looked good, but unfortunately worked bloody terribly. I also had to rebuild my belt grinder to make enough room for me to stand in the correct place. So let's sideline into making a belt grinder. I made some tube steel feet for the motor. This tube steel had holes for threaded rods to add rigidity to the base, and these 2 holes are for bolts to fasten this piece of steel. I guess this is a center column? So this is what we have so far. But with that out of the way, I fired my first shot, and it was bloody pathetic. You can hear the bracket sliding out of place when I pulled back the arrow. The strings also came loose, so now I had to create some better clamping brackets and add an extra 2 bearings into each cam for more rigidity. The improvements I made here didn't take long, and I'll go through them now. So first off, I made a new string standoff arm. This one was longer than the last. Then I modified the cams to fit 2 extra bearings each. I added nuts to help the strings not interfere with the cams. I cleaned up the axle parts and gave them some extra height. This made more of a difference for tuning than I expected. And finally, I added the metal brackets to increase the arm's clamping force. Also, just for shits and giggles, I added a lock feature for tuning the arms left to right. With this newfound enthusiasm, I went to a friend's house to test the bow. And shit man, this all felt so much more real now. It's hard to say if this project was harder or larger than I originally expected, but with a goddamn redneck hillbilly attitude, we got there in the end. In another video, I'll explain where this obsession came from, but for now, let's get to firing. Unfortunately, I don't know anything about filming, so you can't actually glean anything from these clips, but fun was had on this expedition all the same. For this next part of the video, I had to make some dedicated identical cylindrical arrows for the bow. I picked solid aluminium arrows so I can cut the knocking points into the arrow's main body, cutting down on the number of parts needed. And for these arrows, I was testing plastic vanes instead of feathers. They were a pain in the ass to make, and then to cap it off, they performed terribly. But, alas, I did not know that yet, so I went to gluing them all on. I didn't do this on camera, but I did use this little fletching tool I made. Side note, these plastic vanes fall off too easily. But similar idea, different material would do the job. Also, a part of the R&D is working out the best way to attach arrow tips. This is the big downside to solid aluminium shaft. No internal threading means that a bulky collar is required. I tested a variety of tip connections, but honestly, arrows are a tricky work of art, so no great solution was found here yet. I'll have to keep research and developing arrows in following videos. So I moved on to more tests. It was time to go hunting. I sewed myself an especially unthreatening bag so I wasn't arrested whilst walking through town. The goal was to provide video evidence of me catching a fish with the bow. At the beginning, I thought this part would be easy, but I was wrong, though this lizard sure is bloody lucky that I'm not in a real survival situation. To increase my chance of success, I even went camping. This was a spot where I saw a huge fish the week prior, but the fish's gods must have cottoned on to my plan because this was the only bloody fish that I found on my trip. So I tried and failed to catch a fish with the bow for you all. I ended up having to eat noodles and eggs for dinner, but in the interest of keeping this video short, I'm going to use this as my conclusion. In tomorrow's video, I'll showcase a more thorough firing test for you all. But for now, I'm going to go to bed. But hey, thank you for watching. This wasn't so much of a how to do video, but more of a you can do video. So if you're searching for an excuse to take on a new project, double dare you to do it. I promise you'll have fun and you'll learn a lot. Also, leave any questions or critiques in the comments. I always want to try to make good content, so I'm always looking for ways to improve my videos. I'm not a filmmaker, so I know that a lot is left to be desired.